Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister is under pressure to confirm if she knew about a failed Trident missile test near the Florida coast last June. Downing Street has been accused of covering up the incident just weeks before a crucial House of Commons vote on renewing Britain's nuclear deterrent. Theresa May was asked 4 times if she was aware of the test, which reportedly veered off course towards the United States.
When you made that first speech in July in the House of Commons about our Trident nuclear defence, did you know that misfire had occurred?
Well, I have absolute faith in our Trident missiles. When I made that speech in the House of Commons, what we were talking about was whether or not we should renew our Trident, whether or not we should have Trident missiles, an independent nuclear deterrent in the future.
Did you know that it had happened?
I think we should defend our country. I think we should play our role in NATO with an independent nuclear deterrent. Jeremy Corbyn thinks differently. Jeremy Corbyn thinks we shouldn't defend our country.
This is a very serious incident. Did you know about it when you told the House of Commons?
And the issue that we were talking about in the House of Commons was a very serious issue. It was about whether or not we should renew Trident, whether we should look to the future and have a replacement Trident. That's what we were talking about in the House of Commons. That's what the House of Commons voted for. I believe in defending our country. Jeremy Corbyn voted against it. He doesn't want to defend our country with an independent nuclear deterrent.
Prime Minister, did you know?
There are tests that take place all the time regularly for our nuclear deterrents. What we were talking about in that debate that took place was about
I'm not going to get an answer to this.
Well, we live in hope that we may well, at some point, get an answer to that question. In the interim, though, let's speak to our defence correspondent, Alistair Bunko. Alistair, how significant, how serious is a misfiring of this sort?
Well, it hasn't happened before, as far as I'm aware, when it comes to the Trident missile. So in that respect, it is unprecedented. However, I wouldn't get too exercised about how dangerous or otherwise this was. This is 2012, so this was the previous time they test-fired a Trident missile. They tried to do exactly the same this time. You'll see in 2012 they released this footage to us. The problem is in 2016, because it went wrong, they decided not to say anything about it, least of all actually release footage. Now, I understand it didn't veer towards the United States of America, as was speculatively reported. I think it was a problem with a data message that was coming through. And to some degree, there should be some comfort taken by the fact that the Royal Navy successfully and safely managed to abort the missile firing test. But let's look through a graphic that we've got that explains some of the process behind a test. These tests take place every 4 years, incidentally, so when the Prime Minister says it happens the whole time, that's not strictly true. One of the reasons it takes place so few times is because it costs £17 million. So UK submarines have only ever tested Trident 5 times. HMS Vanguard, which is one of the submarines in the nuclear fleet, is 150 metres long. They can carry up to 8 Trident missiles, and then they have a number of warheads on top of that. It last took part in a successful missile test back in 2000, so 16 years before its next one. And it was last June that it took part in this unsuccessful test just off the coast of Florida. And you can see the intended, or at least the supposed trajectory that the missile is supposed to take there, just off the west coast of Africa.
Alistair, in terms of the politics of all of this, now, this isn't a question of, Theresa May misleading the House. She hasn't said anything about this particular issue. However, at the point that MPs were voting on the renewal of Trident, some would argue that they should have been in possession of all the facts, particularly given that the government, the Ministry of Defence, was engaged in something of a PR push backing Trident.
Yeah, I was invited on board one of these nuclear submarines up in Faz Lane to look and see how they operate, meet the crew, etc. The question is was the decision not to make public this failed test, was it a decision taken out of the benefit of national security, or was it a decision taken because of the politics at the time? And from the people I've spoken to, people were aware of this failed test within the Ministry of Defence and within the Royal Navy. That doesn't necessarily prove that the Prime Minister, or Prime Minister Theresa May, was, because don't forget, she wasn't Prime Minister at the time of the failed test. She was Prime Minister a few weeks later when she went to the Commons and made the case for Trident renewal. So was it a question of politics, or was it a question of national security? If it was politics, then that's where the accusations of cover-up come in. And Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, speaking on Sophie Ridge's programme this morning, an ardent anti-nuclear weapon campaigner, well, it's something of an open goal for him.
Well, I think this failure is something that ought to pause everyone for a moment and just think what happened. We understand the Prime Minister chose not to inform Parliament about this, and it's come out through the media some months later. It's a pretty catastrophic error when a missile goes in the wrong direction, and whilst it wasn't armed, goodness knows what the consequences of that could have been. I think we need a serious discussion about that.
A lot of people asking me, quite fairly actually, on Twitter today, well, why should we know? This is a secret part of Britain's defence, and it's a very good point. But the point is that in 2000, 2005, 2009 and 2012, the government was very happy to say that they carried out successful tests. In 2016, weeks before a crucial vote to renew the nuclear deterrent, it was unsuccessful and they decided not to tell the public.
Alistair, thanks very much.
Theresa May says she has absolute faith in the UK's Trident nuclear deterrent system, despite claims an unarmed missile veered off course during a test last summer. On the Andrew Marr programme today, the Prime Minister declined to say whether she knew of the incident before a crucial vote on the future of Trident in Parliament last July. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale has more.
This is what the launch of a Trident missile looks like. Last June, the Royal Navy carried out what it calls a routine unarmed test launch from HMS Vengeance. But it now appears something went wrong. HMS Vengeance was about 200 miles off the Florida coast. It was due to fire the missile around 5,000 miles across the Atlantic. But a malfunction occurred during its flight.
I call the Prime Minister.
Yet just weeks later, Theresa May was asking MPs to vote on spending £40 billion to renew the weapons system.
Mr. Speaker, we have waited long enough. It is time to get on with building the next generation of our nuclear deterrent.
Today, she was asked 4 times if she knew then there'd been a problem.
The issue that we were talking about in the House of Commons was a very serious issue. It was about whether or not we should renew Trident, whether we should look to the future and have a replacement Trident. That's what we were talking about in the House of Commons. That's what the House of Commons voted for. I believe in defending our country. Jeremy Corbyn voted against it. He doesn't want to defend our country with an independent nuclear deterrent.
Prime Minister, did you know?
There are tests that take place all the time regularly for our nuclear deterrents. What we were talking about in that debate that took place was about
I'm not going to get an answer to this.
We understand the Prime Minister chose not to inform Parliament about this, and it's come out through the media some months later. It's a pretty catastrophic error when a missile goes in the wrong direction.
While the Ministry of Defence has publicised past successful test launches of the Trident missile, in this instance they say they will give no further details of the test in June because of national security reasons. In a statement, the MOD would only say that the submarine HMS Vengeance and her crew were successfully tested and certified. But significantly, officials do not deny that there was a problem with the missile or that it might have veered off course. The former head of the Royal Navy says ministers should have come clean.
The missiles have been fired now since 1990, regularly, and they work all the time. This clearly was a problem. That's why you have tests, is to check it. There was some minor problem. I don't think it would have made any difference at all. But by not publicising it, it immediately makes you think, are they hiding something? Is there something wrong? It was a stupid thing to do.
The government still says it has absolute confidence in Britain's nuclear weapons system. But this incident does raise questions about its reliability. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Now the Prime Minister is under pressure to reveal whether she knew about a failed test firing of one of Britain's Trident nuclear missiles before urging MPs to renew the system. A report in the Sunday Times said the unarmed missile had veered off course after launching in June last year. But in a Commons speech on Trident a few weeks later, Mrs May had failed to mention the incident. Paul McNamara reports.
Missile away. Missile away.
This is what a successful Trident missile launch should look like. At £17 million a missile, these tests don't happen very often because of the cost. And today, Downing Street stands accused of covering up the most recent test because of a major missile malfunction. sending the 58-ton warhead capable of hurtling through the air at up to 20,000 feet per second in the wrong direction. That was June last year, just weeks before this key vote on whether to renew the UK's nuclear deterrent.
This has been a vital part of our national security and defence for nearly half a century now.
The question now is, did the Prime Minister know all this and keep it from MPs before this debate? A question she didn't seem keen on answering today.
When you made that first speech in July in the House of Commons about our Trident nuclear defence, did you know that misfire had occurred?
Well, I have absolute faith in our Trident missiles. When I made that speech in the House of Commons, what we were talking about was whether or not we should renew.
Did you know about it when you told the House of Commons?
And the issue that we were talking about in the House of Commons was a very serious issue.
Prime Minister, did you know?
There are tests that take place all the time.
A straight question asked 3 times. No straight answers in sight.
Not going to get an answer to this.
According to the Sunday Times, the missile was fired from the British submarine HMS Vengeance off the coast of Florida last June. It was meant for a target off the coast of West Africa, but veered off course, flying towards America. This was an unarmed missile. Armed, its payload is 8 times more powerful than the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima, killing tens of thousands. This is the first steel plate for the Trident renewal submarines being cut in October. With a cost of £41 billion, some MPs say they should have been made aware of any issues before voting upon it. Even members of her own party believe this incident has been mishandled.
I don't think this makes any difference to the strategic case for Trident whatsoever. On the political front, there's a lesson here for politicians that when something like this goes wrong, and when it doesn't have any particular significance other than in the individual occasion, that they should be rather more open and frank about it.
The nuclear deterrent is an emotive and contentious issue at the best of times. Words like malfunction and potential cover-up don't help. The Prime Minister can expect many more questions to come.